Let me bring in the professor.
Okay.
So who's responsible? Too much government spending? Is that why we have inflation in Australia?
No. No. And let me look at it at a global perspective.
Yeah.
You know, every country around the world is having inflation. And that gives you a perspective that something else is driving inflation. I don't know if you heard about the Russia invasion of Ukraine.
Yeah, of course. I'm across it.
So that drove up oil prices. Do you remember the pandemic? It was a little while ago. And that caused a lot of supply shortages. We had created a market economy that was not resilient, that, just-in-time production was wonderful when everything was wonderful, but it was not designed for even a small perturbation. And we had a big shock, and supply chains broke down. And we have an economy where there's an awful lot of market power. And there's a lot more market power now than there was 25 years ago. Neoliberalism has given full rein to the growth of market power in Australia, in the United States, in many countries around the world. And that market power meant that the companies took advantage of the situation where competition was reduced because supply chains were broken, competition was weaker when you can't get your inputs from other companies. And we've done careful studies to show that those sectors of the economy where there is more market power have had more inflation. We call it in the United States greedflation. And that's what it really is. On the question broadly, in the United States, where we've had inflation, just like you have, we looked very carefully whether aggregate demand, an imbalance between demand and supply, was the cause of inflation. You look at the timing. You look at where the inflation is, what goods prices went up. It's unambiguous. There is no doubt that it is not caused by aggregate demand, excess government spending. Government spending did exactly what you said, Jacqui, that we actually can see how that government spending in the pandemic protected people. That when we gave that money out, we could see the day after that money check arrived, people went out and bought food and they bought the things that they needed. It wasn't luxuries. So we know how much that spending, it wasn't perfectly designed, but the pandemic didn't tell us, 6 months notice, figure out what to do. It came, and we had to react quickly, and we reacted pretty well on average.
Okay. Joseph Stiglitz, I watched the debate in your country as well, and this debate about home ownership is also dominating in the United States as well. It's not just our conversation, in case you thought it was just ours. It's happening there as well. Is it a case of intergenerational inequality, or is Bill Shorten's argument about it being a broader class issue correct?
Well, it's both intergenerational inequality and within the current generational inequality. On the intergenerational thing, I think for Australia, things are even worse than your question hinted at, because first of all, the younger generation are inheriting a world where they're going to have to pay for climate change. The environment is much worse, and that is a liability that it's not in our accounting framework. But they're going to have to pay for it, and they ought to be thinking about it. We ought to be thinking about that liability that they're going to. And we estimate that the fraction of GDP that they're going to have to pay for because of climate change is going to be as large as 4% of GDP every year from just the extreme events. So that's one thing. Now in Australia, you have an extra thing, which is you're giving away your natural resources.
Yeah.
And to me, as a visitor, I find it mind-boggling. I don't understand why you're giving, we need foreign aid in America. A little bit less now that it looks less likely that Trump is going to win, but we do appreciate
What do you think of Kamala Harris?
What?
What do you think of Kamala Harris?
Oh, I like her.
What do you think of her economic policies?
I think they're moving in the right direction. They haven't been announced formally, and it will be, almost surely a continuation of the Biden policies. But basically, yes. But that's another story.
Sorry.
Let me just continue with the fact that you're giving away these natural resources means that your wealth, the wealth of Australia, which important ingredient of that are your natural resources, and you're giving them away to foreign companies in many cases, or to Australian companies that are owned by foreigners. I don't know why you call them an Australian company.
Okay.
They're registered here.
So you think that we're giving them away? Stutch, quick answer on this, because I want to get to my next question. Are we giving them away?
Australia relies a lot on the tax take. Comes a lot from big corporates, and especially big mining and the banks, quite frankly. We rely much more on mining and banking profits for our overall tax take to pay for all these other government services.
If you made them pay for the value of the resources, and you made them pay their fair share of taxes, you wouldn't have the problems that you have today. And let me look, you're giving money, yes, they're creating some jobs, but mining jobs are not the jobs in the future.
No.
Natural resources are not the jobs of the future.
Well, critical minerals, there are new industries emerging though, right?
There are some, but those are high-tech industries, and that's where you ought to be investing. You ought to be investing in people, in education.
51% Australian hands. We should have been doing that with our resources years ago. We would be rich. You guys wouldn't be paying for anything. That's how it should have went.
We would be on holidays.
That's right.
Start very quick answer before we go.
Big miners, BHP, Rio Tinto, Fortescue, even Hancock Prospecting pay a lot of tax.
But not what they
pay a lot of
paying.
Tax, and they pay a lot. You've got a point about the gas companies, but the LNG industry, Australia's become the biggest LNG exporter in the world. I think it's like several $100 billion of capex has gone in to produce that. The issue is,
if they're not going to give the economic return, why are you subsidizing them?
It's not being subsidized.
And normally capitalism is about entrepreneurs investing, putting their money up front, and then they get a return.
They've invested hundreds of billions of dollars in Australia. They do need to get that back, basically.
Could they pay a bit more?
There is some I think some legislation going through Parliament now which might bring a little bit of on the gas, on the LNG, bring it a bit forward.
Would they go a bit further?
By the way, we have done a number of things. We've banned you using your credit card to bet online. We've created bet stops. So we're doing stuff which no government before us has done. So let's try as a bit of a consolation prize.
Okay. Joseph Stiglitz, how does that sound to you? Does that sound fair?
Well, let me say two things. One, it reminds me a little bit about the discussion about advertising for tobacco products that kill people.
Yeah, they survive.
And the fact is,
They survive.
we banned eventually advertising, and I think it seems to me gambling is a dangerous product.
I don't think it kills you.
The second point is...
Kills some people, though.
Yeah, and it's addiction. It is addiction. It is tech addiction.
It's socially, people are making money off of people's weaknesses. The second point, though, is the concern about media, it seems to me, is a deeper problem and ought to be addressed in a more legitimate way. Facebook and Google are stealing legacy media intellectual property and not compensating. You took the lead in Australia in the bargaining code and it set a model for the rest of the world, but you're being a little bit weak in now that Facebook says it may leave, you're not showing the resolve to really make, designate Facebook.
When other countries around the world take on Facebook like we have, then I'll cop the lecture. But I'm sorry we're not the ideal, but we're at least having the argument. And I do get all the points about gambling.
Is a recent crackdown on the CFMEU a distraction from bigger issues in our workplace and undermining the union movement as a whole?
Just a minor point, which was already made, which is part of the reason the problem is there is that there are an awful lot of rents, pure profits in property development. And that's a reflection of the lack of competition and that I mentioned before. And when you have that kind of pure profits in developers, we have it in New York City too. So you get criminality. It's a question of who's going to get the rent. Should it be somebody like Donald Trump or some gangs, some union? And the fact is, if you get at the source and make the property market more competitive, you regulate the competition, it will take out some of the opportunities for this rent-seeking by workers. You have to approach this from a systemic point of view.
There's no competition because the Labor monopoly is taken over.
Exactly.
Taken over.
My God.
Look, we talk a lot about the big corporates, but the small business sector is really doing it tough, as you've articulated. Is that a missing part of the story that we don't really focus on enough? What inflation, what high interest rates do for businesses and workers and business owners like that?
Yeah, yes, but one has to try to keep this in perspective that inflation is not really the root of all evil. It's not really the source of the problem. Because what happens when you have inflation is that wages go up, prices go up. The real thing, actually, one of the problems of inflation right now is that real wages have not been keeping up with prices.
Gone backwards.
And so from the point of view of somebody hiring somebody, the labor market is actually weaker. And so it's advantageous for the small business. But the high interest rates are the real problem. And the high interest rates, a lot of small businesses borrow, and they have to pay not only the basic rate, but a rate well above that basic rate. And, let's be clear. I meant to say this earlier, but I didn't have a chance. The RBA is
Blame
just,
them.
The RBA is just wrong in its diagnosis of the economy. I hate to insult some. But,
all right, Jim Chalmers did it for you.
But he's right. I mean, the fact is that their diagnosis of the problem, does raising interest rates create more oil to get energy prices down? No. Does it create more food, more eggs? No. Does it create more housing? Well, it actually makes it more difficult to construct housing. So it exacerbates the housing problem. So the RBA is actually making the problem of inflation worse. And it then makes it more difficult for small businesses to do their business.
Okay.